Imagine paying £600 million over 2 years, only to get worse. Have your manager, accused of being a borderline tyrannical control freak, be haunted by clips of one spinny boy, have goalkeepers who can't catch balls, and hold an aggregate scoreline of 4-13 against your biggest rivals. This is the Manchester United experience under Erik Ten Hag.
An era can come to an end.
Over the years, decision-making has proven itself to be a contentious topic at Manchester United. Coach after coach, player after player, setback after setback, it never seemed to end. After statistically the worst period in the history of the club, they turned to Dutch manager Erik Ten Hag to bring order to the madness. A manager with a strong record of nurturing youth, a guy with a certain no-nonsense look to his demeanor. Why not give it a go? Unfortunately, things don't always go according to plan. But I will give you this. What nobody can argue with is that before any of this came to be, it was apparent to anyone watching that drastic measures needed to be taken. Measures that some would describe was needed in the form of open heart surgery. We kick things off in 2022. Manchester United's choice to gamble on former icon Ole Gunnar Solskjaer came agonizingly close to paying dividends over his 3-year stint. The club was playing some incredible football at various points and looked to be building something formidable. Sadly, none of this was anchored in reality as piece by piece, everything began to fall apart. All of this has been covered on Football Iconic in the past, but for the purposes of context, here's a quick recap. The 2021-22 football season, more than I would say any other season in the post-Ferguson era, was supposed to mark the great return of Manchester United. The club had just finished in second place in the league and gotten to a European Cup final. It was finally looking like the team that so many feared was on their way back to the land of the living. No doubt reinforcements in the form of Jadon Sancho, Rafael Varane, and Cristiano Ronaldo only fanned the flame. Maybe we should have just all known better, because this optimism was, of course, short-lived. Solskjaer's United capitulated, following a loss of team cohesion, power balance issues, and more. Criticisms over the acquisition of 36-year-old Cristiano Ronaldo was amongst the loudest. The divide regarding those that believed that Ronaldo was the problem due to his lack of mobility in a highly mobile setup, and those that believed the team and leadership were the problem due to their inability to build around the greatest goal scorer of all time, grew larger and larger by the day. All of it came to a head when Solskjaer failed to win even once in his last 7 games and was cut loose in November. Alright, now that we're all caught up, Michael Carrick, perhaps the greatest Manchester United manager to ever exist, stepped up as caretaker and went undefeated for the next 3 games. Stories have been written, theatrical adaptations are currently in the works. Carrick the courageous, Carrick the cool, Carrick the... I've run out of ideas, but you get the point. The working title of the feature-length film, it hasn't been finalized. Sorry, I'm going off script. Once Carrick's time was up, interim manager Ralf Rangnick was brought in with the intention of simply cleaning the mess to allow the eventual permanent manager to flourish, before moving into a 2-year consultancy role to see out the cleanup. Instead, the German spell only served to uncover and magnify the deep rot within the club. Ralf Rangnick, at 63 years old, was a very respectable figure in the game. He's largely credited with guiding both RB Leipzig and Red Bull Salzburg to domestic prominence as the director of football for both clubs from 2012 to 2018. As a pure football manager, he has never won a top 5 league title, which is a fact that was constantly used to discredit this move, and honestly a fair critique. But from the outside looking in, this isn't what he was brought in to do. It's not like Manchester United were a club that was in contention in any case. Even further, Rangnick's eye for talent was questioned by no one after seeing how quickly he was able to help build the Red Bull clubs. His knowledge of football organization, efficient systems, and overall growth was, likewise, hard to argue against. But it didn't take long before he realized that he was fighting an uphill battle. Results were mixed. An improvement on Solskjaer's final days, which left the club in 7th. By February, the club were in 4th, leaking significantly less goals. However, the tenure was riddled with friction between board members, players, and coaching staff. The dressing room was simply a mess. Players were opposed to his training methods, which focused primarily on full-field 11v11 organizational and fundamental work instead of dynamic drills. Rangnick felt the team lacked basic fundamentals. The players felt otherwise. It was leaked that Rangnick's assistant coach, Chris Armas, who happened to be American, was referred to as Ted Lasso by certain players. You can infer what you will about that regarding how highly they thought of his abilities. Of course, Rangnick was not helped by the sudden revelation that arguably the most promising youth player that United had produced in decades was now suspected of assaulting his partner. In 2021, 20-year-old attacker Mason Greenwood placed 5th in the rankings of best player under 21 years old in the world, just behind Pedri, Jude Bellingham, Jamal Musiala, and Nuno Mendes. Many had placed their faith in him to lead the club's next generation. Mason Greenwood was arrested on the aforementioned charges. Criminal charges were later dropped, but his public perception was deservedly forever tarnished, and he would never don United colours ever again. Going back to factors within the club's control, specifically decisions made by the board and ownership, it seemed that despite hiring Rangnick for what was meant to be a long-term overhaul, they were reluctant to take his recommendations to heart. Rangnick reportedly suggested a whole host of players for the club to look into, but was instead told that the club would rather wait to appoint a new manager and would prefer his input before making any decisions. Names that have been thrown around included Josko Vardiol, Christopher Nkunku, Luis Diaz, Conrad Leimer, Julian Alvarez, even Enzo Fernandez, all of whom he claims were available and realistic targets at points throughout the 2022 winter or summer windows. All of these players, bar Conrad Leimer, eventually ended up joining United's direct rivals, enjoying silverware and success. From the very beginning, it was obvious that there was a mismatch in the communicated expectations and influence between the manager and the board, which likely played a role in Rangnick's most famous interview in this period.
It's crystal clear. It's not that difficult. You don't even need glasses to analyze and to see where the problems are. So now it's only about how do we solve them. And for me, it's clear it's not enough to do some little minor amendments, some little issues here and there, some minor cosmetic things. No, in medicine you would see this is an operation at the open heart.
By the end of that season, the team did only slightly better than under Solskjaer. 1.54 points per game for Rangnick versus 1.41 points per game for Solskjaer, finishing the year with 58 points. The worst tally the club had ever recorded in the Premier League era, the worst day in the lives of many of the faithful. But again, I remind you, this is not what he was brought in to do. Now, moving from the hot seat, he would finally have the time and space to. Rangnick confirms he will leave United. 7 days after the last game of the 21-22 season, the reasoning for this was framed as Rangnick wanting to fully commit to his role as Austria's national team coach. But at the same time, it also seemed as though this was more of a choice that was forced upon him than anything else, directly linked to the incoming United coach. We'll get into the details of this a little later. Now, as far as the fan perspective goes, unless you were on the board, you can't claim to know what all of Rangnick's suggestions were. They could well have all been terrible for the most part. We can't definitively rule that out. But at the end of the day, you do have to ask yourself, if a club is willing to commit to plans, pour millions and build hype into a long-term project, and only months later abandon them so flippantly, not even for the first time, what hope is there that any plan, good or bad, will be given the time of day? Ultimately, Manchester United hired Rangnick for a job they strangely enough were reluctant to allow him to do, which of course begs the ultimate question. Why? What was the point? I've searched long and hard for the answers, consulted several specialists, and I've come to a solution. Yeah, I'm not exactly sure. I'm not exactly sure why they did that. There were some casualties in the boardroom, to be fair. Heads did need to roll. Ed Woodward, longtime CEO from 2012 to 2022, was axed and more or less took a lot of the fall for all of this madness. Woodward had actually been set to leave United since a year prior in early 2021, but his actual departure date in 2022 was emblematic of how the club had gotten into this position in the first place. From a commercial perspective, there seems to be nobody that was more responsible for ensuring that United's financial success was no longer tied to their sporting success, something that proved to be incredibly incredibly important during their worst period in the Premier League era. But of course, this came at the cost of sporting success. For over a decade, United were perceived to be incompetent in the transfer market, unable to negotiate with the might of a club of their stature, constantly overpaying and handing out outrageous wages, often as last-ditch resorts at the end of a window. From a public-facing perspective, Woodward is widely associated as the face of this era. Maybe the funniest story of his tenure as CEO was how he reportedly soured United's chances of acquiring Jurgen Klopp's services before he went to Liverpool. He did so by describing Manchester United as Disneyland for adults. Klopp was unimpressed. Being a product of the German football system, it's no surprise that pitching the club as a corporate entity as opposed to a football organization would not excite him. Anyway, the reset button had been pushed, and United laid their hopes on the new manager not being averse to amusement parks. But before we get into that, a quick message. Some of the decision making that was on display during this period was just so questionable. It really made me wonder whether, the people in charge were dehydrated, perhaps. I mean, it's a bit late now, but I know something that would have helped. Holy. Simply put, Holy are great tasting drinks without all the junk you get from soft drinks. They were kind enough to send me one of their starter set deluxe packages with a whole range of flavors for different purposes. You get Holy Energy for sharpening those senses, Holy Hydration for hydrating, Holy Milkshake. It's a milkshake. Holy Iced Tea, holy moly, it's iced tea. Yeah, I'm not particularly proud of that one, but I'm leaving it in. The peach and black tea flavor is incredible. Making it is super simple. Fill up a Holy shaker with 500 ml of water, add in your flavor of choice, shake it up, and you're good. Okay, so just a quick one. This is me recording the voiceover for this integration, and I kid you not, I wouldn't be promoting this product if I didn't actually really like it. So it's been a week since I got it, and I'm almost finished with the Holy Iced Tea and Holy Energy sachets, so I very well might be ordering more for myself after this. And if you want to support Holy, who by the way support me in being able to make these sorts of videos with all the editing and writing and scripting and everything that goes into it, you can click the link in the description and use code FootballIconic5 for £5 off your first order, or code FootballIconic for 10% off. Once again, thanks so much to Holy for making this video possible. Let's get back to it. Manchester United's search for a new manager had led them to the Netherlands, where the focus was on Ajax, the most successful club in the history of the Eredivisie, and the employer of a man whose stock was at an all-time high, Erik Ten Hag. Born on February 2nd, 1970 in Haaksbergen, a small town in eastern Netherlands, Ten Hag was reportedly a bit of a know-it-all when it came to football, according to those that held him dear. Upon joining United, a childhood friend of his once said, quote, "You could even back then see already a coach in him. He was always a captain. When we watched football at a young age, he always knew what should happen. As a player, he was a reliable centre-back, playing professional football for 13 years, mostly in the Eredivisie. Like a large number of coaches, the perception was that he was really an average player by comparison to his more athletic contemporaries, but his footballing mind more than made up for it all. Upon retiring, age 32, everyone knew what line of work he was headed into. His journey took him from Twente to PSV to Go Ahead Eagles, eventually finding himself in Germany as Bayern Munich's reserve coach. A very notable and pivotal point, as it coincided with Pep Guardiola's tenure. The sheer volume of bold energy in the room was enough to spawn several league titles. His time with Guardiola, who in turn was mentored by fellow Dutchman Johan Cruyff, really helped to solidify his version of total football. All roads led to the biggest job in his homeland. By this point, the playbook was set. Ten Hag was a disciplinarian, someone who strived for the best in every aspect of the organization. He aimed to have control of as much of the club as possible and worked best with players and staff that allowed him the room to do so. So it should be unsurprising that the effectiveness of his methods is amplified on the youth. A good example of this comes in the form of Eljero Elia, a former youth player under Ten Hag when he was at Twente between 2007 and 2009. Elia has frequently come to Ten Hag's praise regarding how he helped mold him as a player and person, claiming he would not have played at the 2010 World Cup without Ten Hag pushing him. Quote, "He was always involved with me in every way, not only as a football player, he was also controlling my private life, wanted me to develop as a person, to read newspapers and to watch the news. After I had refueled my car once during the night, Erik asked the next day why I was out so late. not as a police officer, but more as your favorite teacher who cared deeply. End quote. This was the reputation that Ten Hag was building on the global stage, and his time at Ajax only served to prove that he possessed a highly desirable skill set. Equipped with a team fueled by one of the most prestigious youth academies that football has to offer from 2018, Erik Ten Hag flourished. High-intensity training, positional discipline, flexibility over everything. Between 2018 and 2022, he led the club to 3 Eredivisie titles in that 4-year time frame. Looking back at the squad that Ajax possessed around 2019 presents quite the feast for the eyes. The likes of Matthias de Ligt, Frenkie de Jong, Donny van de Beek, and of course, Andre Onana. All of them were 23 or younger, with a 17-year-old Ryan Gravenberch waiting in the wings. Each player played with the maturity of grizzled veterans. All of this is what led to an unforgettable run to the Champions League semi-finals for Ajax in 18-19. Incredible memories were made at the Bernabeu. Real Madrid won, Ajax 4. Unforgettable moments were forged at Juventus's Allianz Stadium. Juventus won, Ajax 2. Having said all of that, the semi-finals is where the party ended. Ironically, it's easy to simply blame this on inexperience and a bit of naivety from both the players and the manager. An utter collapse against Tottenham Hotspur at home in the semi-final second leg pointed towards that conclusion. Seconds from another historic win, ensuring passage to the final versus Liverpool, they opted not to protect a 3-0 aggregate lead they had with only 55 minutes to play. This is what led to a shocking 3-2 comeback from Spurs on the night and a victory on the away goals ruling. Ajax was distraught. And the only reason I've decided to discuss this Ajax and this particular point in their cycle at length in a Manchester United video is because it was perhaps the first time that Ten Hag's game management and composure was questioned on a big stage in the eyes of the global football audience. It would not be the last. Nonetheless, fast forward 3 years, and Manchester United were convinced that they had their guy. April 2022, a 3-year deal was inked.
The new manager at Manchester United, Erik Ten Hag.
As we've already established, Erik Ten Hag had grown a huge reputation over the years as a man that needed to be in control. As the stories go, upon arriving at Carrington, he ordered that grass be cut to a certain length for quicker passing. He requested that the video analysis room be redesigned with tiered flooring, huge screens, and more, a project that is estimated to have cost over £200,000. He reorganized the entire locker room to separate defenders, attackers, and midfielders so they were in their respective lines on a tactics board. As we've already covered, the Ralf Rangnick project, which filled many with the sense that stability was in the offing, was axed. We've been led to believe that this was because Ten Hag was in opposition of sharing his vision and preferred to not work with Rangnick.
The club have had an interim manager in Ralf Rangnick for the past 6 months. Do you plan to sit down with Ralf and listen very clearly to his findings over the past 6 months?
I analyze by myself, I observe, and I speak with a lot of people. But finally, I will draw my own line.
All that was left for the Dutchman to do was prove that all of this was worth the outlay. The club got straight to work, signing up right-wing Antony, centre-back Lisandro Martinez, and CDM Casemiro. For added context, for years, a common opinion around Manchester United supporters was that they had failed to sign a functional right-winger since the departure of Cristiano Ronaldo back in 2009. A similar sentiment was held regarding the defensive midfield position, and despite multiple attempts, the centre-back position had yet to be suitably filled. All 3 of these new signings appeared to be well thought out on the surface, until you realize that they came for over £200 million combined. Casemiro was 30 years old, and Martinez and Antony were both Ten Hag's former Ajax players, neither of whom were rated as highly as their price tag suggested, especially Antony. £90 million, huh? Interesting. These were big bets on a vision of a man so soon after dismissing the vision of the last guy. Confidence in the new plan fell through the floor when United lost their first 2 games of the year, the latter being a 4-0 bashing by Brentford. The team looked hopeless in their attempts to implement a possession-based high-pressing style. In the Brentford match, everything was just so lethargic from a United perspective. Brentford were quicker, stronger, smarter at every step. David De Gea, so reliable in the past, decided to play the game with butter on his gloves. for some reason. A strange choice. Oh, also, the final name on the score sheet for Brentford on the day, Brian Mbeumo. In those two games, United were caught with their pants so tight around their ankles, the opposition started making fun of them. Not the best start. But Ten Hag was determined to bleed with his players and foster a strong environment. Famously, he made the squad run 13.8 kilometers the following day, the distance that Brentford outran them during the match. Not only that, but he did the run with them. And a strange thing began to happen from there on. Was it this showing of togetherness with the post-game run? Was it his coaching methods? The delayed activation of a new manager bounce maybe? Whatever it was, United then kinda began to kick into gear. The very next match, Ten Hag came up against Liverpool.
Sancho takes another touch and puts it home! It's 2 for Manchester United! Manchester United have beaten Liverpool in matchday 3.
This win kicked off a 4-game win streak, culminating in a 3-1 win against Arsenal. It seemed as though Ten Hag had found a great balance between playing without the ball against the likes of Arsenal and Liverpool and being more proactive against teams lower in the table, knowing when to drop the defensive line and making great use of Rashford's pace. At least that's what it looked like until they met Manchester City, the same City that would win the treble that year.
De Bruyne, Haaland, 3-0, Foden, 4-0, Haaland, 5-1, Foden, 6-1.
It was a bloodbath. There was one team playing in this game and they were doing training drills from minute 1. Everything was just so easy. The City boys were having so much fun, the City fans couldn't get enough of it. Would you believe it? 2 City players got hat-tricks in a 6-3 win. But don't let United's 3 make you believe for a second that they were ever in contention. All United goals were the textbook definition of consolation once the game was already over. Sir Alex wanted the ground to swallow him up before the halftime whistle. Although, I must say, United's final goal was an Anthony Martial penalty and it was genuinely one of the best penalties you'll ever see. United's second goal was an absolute worldie from Anthony that just nobody saw coming at all. He would soon start to do that for Real Betis every week because, of course he would. Moving along, the remainder of the season followed suit with the beginning and gave us unexpected highs and very odd lows. The highs included United climbing up to 3rd place on the log, reinstating Champions League status. For the first time since 2017, silverware made its way to Old Trafford as the League Cup was secured. A first season ending with a trophy of any kind is a great achievement, but for a lot of reasons, this achievement felt somewhat overshadowed by perhaps the most famous football player of all time. Before the season even began, the headlines were printing with Cristiano Ronaldo missing parts of preseason due to family reasons. Although there were rumors, Ronaldo himself did not publicly disclose the reasoning behind this absence until months later. But in the interim, the press cycle ran wild with the perception that Ronaldo, who was already believed to be want away from the Solskjaer days, was simply seeking an exit while the window was open. Cristiano Ronaldo's fortunes had not improved with the introduction of Ten Hag. In 10 games across the campaign, he only started 6 and was essentially made obsolete in the setup Ten Hag was trying to achieve. Ten Hag very clearly did not fancy Ronaldo as a starter. Ronaldo very clearly did not fancy Ten Hag as a coach. That much was obvious when United were winning a match against Spurs 2-0 in October. Honestly, one of the best performances of the entire season by the club. Ten Hag appeared to send Ronaldo out to warm up and Ronaldo then refused to come off the bench and close out the game, famously walking down the tunnel while the clock was still ticking, perhaps feeling that his ability was being undermined. So when everyone broke off and joined their countries for an unprecedented December World Cup in Qatar, there was a feeling that come January, the player and the club would go their separate ways. Evidently, Ronaldo was not prepared to wait that long.
I'm not hiding that the empathy with the coach is not good.
He chose the nuclear option and rang up famous Arsenal supporter and media antagonist Piers Morgan for a tell-all interview late November.
Cristiano, let me start just by asking you, why are you doing this interview with me?
Because I think it's the time to say something.
The comments, revelations, and accusations that came out of this interview were simply jaw-dropping. First, he mentioned that he was absent for parts of preseason due to his newborn daughter having health issues. He stated that he felt the club did not believe him.
I spoke with the directive and the president of Manchester United, and then kind of that didn't believe.
Really?
Yes.
I didn't believe you.
He stated that he never even knew who Ralf Rangnick was before he joined the club.
They bring sport directive Ralf Rangnick, which is something that nobody understands. This guy is not even a coach.
I'd never heard of him, and I'm thinking had you heard of him?
No, of course not.
You'd never heard of this guy?
Ronaldo claimed that he felt betrayed by Manchester United and the manager, saying that there were people that were actively trying to force him out of the club.
They're trying to force you out?
Yes, not only the coach, but the other 2 or 3 guys there around.
At the senior executive level?
Yes. That I felt betrayed.
He claimed that the club's facilities had not been upgraded or changed since he left the club for Real Madrid 13 years prior.
Nothing had changed since you'd left in 2009.
Nothing changed. Surprisingly, not only the pool, the jacuzzi, even the gym. They stopped in a time.
He directly called out the Glazers, stating that they only cared about money and marketing, not football.
The owners of the club, they don't.
The Glazers.
The Glazers, they don't care about the club. As you know, Manchester is a marketing club.
Do you ever talk to them, the Glazers?
Never.
During a period where the World Cup was on everyone's minds, Manchester United somehow managed to be the center of attention, with all of it culminating in Ronaldo being released with immediate effect on the 22nd of November, meaning he was jobless during the World Cup. Just like me. However, the darkest patch of United's season came a couple months later. For the first time in years, United travelled to Anfield as the stronger side of the two, doing better in the league, gelling well, all while Jurgen Klopp and Liverpool were in between cycles. Everything pointed towards a United win. Instead...
A wonderful finish! Darwin Núñez! Chipako! Salah! Darwin Núñez! Salah! It's in! Liverpool 7. Manchester United 0.
7-0. 7-0. My God. 7-0? United lost 7-0 to the worst Liverpool side since Jurgen Klopp arrived 7 years prior. It was truly unbelievable. Like City had done earlier in the campaign, United were just sliced through like butter. It was a tough week for all United fans. Anyway, let's not discount all that was achieved in that first year. The club was back to winning ways. Marcus Rashford was in the form of his life. The strict disciplinarian approach was not a hit with the Ronaldo fans, but it showed that he was not about to bow to star pressure. There's also strong reason to believe that Ronaldo wasn't targeted either. For example, Marcus Rashford was dropped while in the middle of his hot streak because he was late to meet up with the team before a Wolves match. He took it in his stride, came off the bench, and scored a winner. Conversely, the manager was also praised for having a human touch. Jadon Sancho was said to be struggling with a mental health issue in late 2022 and was allowed time away from the spotlight. Ten Hag even defended him in the media whenever the topic came up. The Liverpool loss, the Man City loss, losses to Sevilla in the Europa League. This squad wasn't perfect, but they were capable of winning, no doubt about that, strengthened further by an FA Cup final appearance too. Understandably lost to a treble-winning Manchester City side. Even if you believe that this Manchester United side were overperforming, Ten Hag had earned the chance to prove that they were not. United were now back in Europe, but the start of the 23-24 season left quite a bit to be desired. Mason Mount from Chelsea for £60 million, a good player but also a player known to be carrying injuries. Rasmus Højlund, a promising 20-year-old Danish striker, but also a player that had yet to be tested at the highest level, for £72 million, and goalkeeper Andre Onana for £43 million as replacement for David De Gea. This one stung several fans for several reasons. De Gea had been slipping in form for some time and it was probably time for him to move on. But in the end, it was reported that he had agreed upon a contract extension verbally with the club, only for discussions to break down as they lowered their offer at the last moment. This man was almost solely responsible for keeping the team competitive over several years in the late 2010s. He is the 7th highest appearance maker for the club with 545 matches, and he was offered no testimonial or home game to bid goodbye. A real shame. Many felt that he deserved more. It was full speed ahead on this new era for Man United, and Onana was supposed to play a key part in this. De Gea is in real contention for the best pure shot stopper in the modern era of football, but his biggest weakness was always his distribution and general ability with ball at feet. Onana was a bit more comfortable on the ball, having shown his skill over the last year with an Inter Milan side that made it all the way to the Champions League final. Also a player with a strong reputation at the time, let's not rewrite history, and also, if you recall, a former Ten Hag player with Ajax. Ultimately, United failed to ever find a rhythm of any kind in the 23-24 season. It seemed that there was a setback every week, both on the pitch and off it. By this point, the club had spent over £400 million on the Ten Hag project, bought in midfielders, defenders, attackers, goalkeepers, yet there was no cohesion between the lines in-game. Attackers would press high, while defenders would sit deep, leaving the most important part of the field unattended. Almost unattended. Casemiro was being left all alone in the midfield to do the job of multiple people and was getting exposed day in, day out. He was making mistakes, but realistically, he was also kinda set up to fail from the start. Perhaps in his younger days he would have fared better, but I don't think by very much. His performances this season are what led to a very famous quote by Jamie Carragher.
Leave the football before the football leaves you.
Carragher is talking about Casemiro here, but this quote could have applied to several players, to be completely honest. 8th is where the team finished, with a negative goal difference, capped off with being knocked out of the Champions League at the group stage, where they finished rock bottom. Ten Hag's stock was tanking rapidly. Although, unlike in the past, after so much time, money and hope was invested in him, the club was inclined to at least attempt to stay the course, honoring his 3-year contract. This was the feeling that incoming owner Sir Jim Ratcliffe had. Ratcliffe and his Ineos Group company completed a purchase of 27% of Manchester United in early 2024, a feeling that by many accounts faded by the end of that season, but was only upheld thanks to a shock FA Cup win. Genuinely, very few people expected United to even make it that far, beating Liverpool in a dramatic 4-3 win on the way too. Everyone looking on knew that prior to the FA Cup final, Ten Hag was likely close to the sack, win or lose. Simply because the likelihood of winning was so low, United's open search for his replacement was widely reported in the lead up to the game. And when he actually did it and won, it would have taken some seriously real cutthroat behavior to follow through. It bought Ten Hag time, which is actually quite funny, ironic when you think about it. It's exactly how Louis van Gaal, his fellow countryman's tenure, ended 8 years prior, an FA Cup win and a letter of employment termination shortly after. Van Gaal was sacked for finishing in 5th, which tells you all you really need to know regarding how the expectations dipped at the club over the years. We have to acknowledge that the board were faced with a really difficult choice this time around. It really did seem like they didn't want to be as hasty as they had been in the past, but also were well aware that they were aboard a sinking ship. We can take all that into consideration and do so while also admitting what was and still is on all our minds. They chose poorly. Ten Hag was awarded a contract extension and another couple £100 million to play around with for the 24-25 year. Unsurprisingly, doubling down on a losing formula would only really lead to more losing. The preseason tour was incredibly poor, 4 losses and 3 wins. It's just preseason, so nothing to truly worry about. Still, nothing to claim confidence from either, especially because the season played out more or less exactly the same way. Simply horrific football from the first kick of the ball, leaving United in 14th place 9 games into the year, with 3-0 losses to both Liverpool and Tottenham Hotspur to boot. And while all this was happening, like clockwork, all the stories began to pour in regarding what was reportedly really going on behind the scenes. There were stories United players held extreme disdain for Ten Hag's training methods. He would punish poor performances with extra training. The extra fatigue is believed to have been the main cause for an unprecedented injury crisis for the club in the previous year, which saw them suffer 45 separate injuries to first-team players. The squad would naturally be weakened, lose more games, and the cycle would repeat. There were stories that players never knew how to read the manager. One day, he's jolly. The next, He's nothing but forehead wrinkles. Jadon Sancho's situation serves as a testament to these split opinions. If you recall, Sancho was allowed time to clear his head, but upon his return, was then sent away again by Ten Hag, who cited poor training effort as the reason. Sancho then retaliated in public, claiming he was actively being scapegoated by the coach on his social media pages, further implying that the coach had a tendency to play favorites. Sancho was then banished from the team, told to train and eat alone, and apparently even told by Ten Hag that the only way back was through a public apology, seeing as how he made the issue public in the first place. Spectators felt Ten Hag was in the right. Reportedly, fellow teammates felt the same. But many still felt that the punishment was too severe, too humiliating, and that he did tend to play favorites. Nowhere was this more evident than in the players United recruited under him. All in all, Ten Hag oversaw £600 million plus in player recruitment, and while there were some solid hits in there, the return on investment just left far too much to be desired. Ten Hag was said to have a veto clause in his contract for all transfers and had an extremely strong bias towards Dutch or Ajax-linked recruitment. Rasmus Højlund, in addition, had the same agency representation as Ten Hag. On top of that, every single window there were strong rumors that ETH had tried to push the club into signing Frenkie de Jong from Barcelona, another former Ajax player. He tried and failed to sign Harry Kane, who was leaving Tottenham Hotspur in the hunt for major silverware. Kane was arguably the best attacker on the planet. Manchester United, likely was not what he was after, so he joined Bayern Munich. At the end of the day, as Karl Anker of The Athletic put it, Ten Hag was simply overwhelmed. He could not handle the player power at a club like Manchester United, where all the players are businesses in themselves. He could not appease its multi-generational, expansive fan base. He could not appease his own bosses. So, in October of 2024, with United in 14th place and on the decline, he was let go. Ten Hag's tenure marked the end of yet another cycle in the club's post-Ferguson history. When all was said and done, he left his successor with many of the same structural problems that he himself inherited, arguably in a worse state altogether. Was he a victim of circumstance? By this point, United was well known as a graveyard for many careers of managers and players. Or was he simply just a problem that needed to be moved on from? Both of these things can be true at the same time to varying degrees depending on who you ask. There are, of course, positives to take away from Ten Hag's tenure as Manchester United manager, silverware being the biggest. The blooding of young players such as Kobbie Mainoo and Alejandro Garnacho into household names. But at the end of the day, it just did not work out. However, not all was lost. At this point, the club had been through a lot, several managers, several players. With all that knowledge, surely now the only direction was up, right?